Hey everybody, Tim Casey, Alvin, Taveras coming back to you with another build to rent approach and perspective on the upcoming 2024 election. Alvin, I think today we really wanted to jump into the concept of like just general proposals around like rent control, affordable housing programs, and how each candidate is obviously taking a different approach. Because I know, if we want to jump into rent control measures, Trump, he's kind of opposed to that federal rent control. He prefers that to be a state and local handling issue, and thus that encourages investors and gives them the confidence by avoiding rent control measures. Whereas, Harris proposed rent control measures for landlords owning more than 50 units or limit rent increases to 5%. So those are two very different perspectives on rent control. But curious to kind of get your thoughts and kind of how investors should kind of think about that.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is this is not a new idea. It has always existed. The idea of a government price fixing something has always been around. And wherever it's been tried, it failed, right? It doesn't work. It's not a good idea. You will not find any economist that says this is a good idea, right? What it does is it always creates less supply. And if you want to reduce the value of something, you create more supply. So that applies whether it's a Babe Ruth baseball card, a Pokemon card, housing, a Bentley, whatever you're talking about. If there's just a bunch of them, it's going to bring the price down, which is often why, collectors collect rare cars because that's going to go up in value. If you flood the market with something, you're going to get inherently a lot less of it. So one, not a new idea. It's been around forever and it always fails. The other part is that this is not just a US story either. This is actually happening in multiple different countries. And a lot of other countries have already implemented this. Mexico had recently passed a law. They have a more liberal governor now in Mexico City. They're bringing that reform in. And this is also being done in Canada as well, also in England. So multiple different countries are now going in this direction. So this seems to be a very global approach of handling this. So whenever you see government involved in something, know that they're getting control. That's always the case. It's always a trade-off. It's always saying the market can't control this, so we will. So now we become more dependent at the controls of the government. And so it doesn't work for two primary reasons. One is that you can either give it an arbitrary number like 5% and say, hey, rent control is capped at 5%, or you can try to tie it to another number like inflation. So if you look at our inflation numbers, everyone believes that they're being underrepresented. They're not capturing real inflation. So even though your insurance, State Farm just increased their insurance by 34% in California. Like if you are a homeowner or you are a property owner and your insurance goes up 34%, but you can only increase your rent by 5%, you're underwater right away.
Absolutely.
And that's not a good sign for a builder. So if you tie it to number, it's not good. And if you tie it to just 5% in general, we had time periods during COVID where inflation was at 7-8%. So again, you're way over. And what it also does, it means that guaranteed every single year, I need to increase my rent 5%. I have to. There's no way that I can't raise my rent 5%. Because if I ever give my tenant a break, I won't be able to get that opportunity again to catch up again. So I have to increase it. The third part is that it basically makes me never want to improve my property. There's always a ceiling on how much I can raise the rent. And it may force me to just arbitrarily kick people out of my unit so that I can increase the rent. So it creates a more hostile, less enjoyable market for both tenants and for the investors. And overall, it just makes a mess of a situation. The best way to handle this is really two forms. One is mobility. People need to be able to move around and find areas where there are cheaper housing. There are plenty of places in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Indianapolis that actually offer people a better standard of living. That's actually a lot more affordable than being in some of these coastal cities. It makes more sense. And my family's done this. My family used to live in New York and then they moved to Pennsylvania because it is more affordable. And now they're homeowners. If they would have stayed in New York, they would have been renters forever, their entire lives, because they had to keep that cheaper rental unit. I got very passionate about this, but it's because it's a really dumb idea and it fails all the time. And you can see it in real life that it doesn't work. People in New York who are in a rent control apartments never become owners. They never own anything. And that should be a miss. We should be encouraging more ownership, not having more renters for life.
Yeah, and that's the challenge is, there's been tried before, it's never worked, it's not going to work. Fundamentally, it can't work. But for whatever reason, politicians keep bringing it up because it moves the needle on building their base. It moves the needle on votes. But, this is a great example of, if you're an investor, you're going to hear people talking about this all the time, but you have to understand the history of rent controls and these initiatives. And, this isn't new. No one is innovative by talking about this, but, they're getting attention in a certain subset of their base that's going to get them votes. So take it for what it is, understand the history of it, and then work your strategy through it. But at the end of the day, when you look at, how these rent controls are being presented, I think it's very important that you're aware that, one side is pushing these pretty hard. I would say it's one of their top tier initiatives on their entire approach. And that, of course, being the Harris side of the argument, they're pushing this topic very hard.
Well, and it makes sense to be sensitive to people who are hurting or having a difficult spot.
Of course.
It's never fun when you have a limited amount of earning potential and your costs are just going up. You definitely do feel helpless. But I think it's also fair for the government to say, hey, what was their role in making things so expensive, right? And a government won't say that. They won't admit that their problem was overspending, was funding things they shouldn't have, was being wildly inefficient. They won't mention those things. And so that's why they'll blame it on something else and try to insert themselves to get more control to try to solve your problems. It's a play and it's not the right approach. And again, no economist would recommend this as a path.
No, they wouldn't.